Now, one of the more unique and also useful complications for those that travel or do business across the globe is going to be the World Timer. So in this video, what we wanted to do is look at some different World Timer watches available to you in 2023, looking at a wide variety of price ranges from everywhere from, say, under $100 all the way up to high horology. Now, World Times are typically seen in their purest form by having a rotating 24-hour disc and also having an additional disc for all the different time zones around the world. We will have some modifications to that in this video. So some watches that have more World Time functionality than maybe seeing World Time to its purest form. That's going to allow us to have more flexibility in our budget and offering more options to you. And if you want even more World Timers, you see this list and you just want to get lost even further, we're going to have over a dozen, I believe, in this video. But we'll also have an article down below looking at 17 World Time watches to know in 2023. That will be in the description. Check it out after you're done watching this one if you want to get lost even more. So the majority of the watches that we're going to be looking at in this video are going to be of the mechanical variety, but this is going to be an anomaly both from a movement perspective and also from a price perspective, because we're talking about a watch here that is only $25. That is the Casio World Time, the AW1200. So this is a watch that of course is digital in nature, but it offers everything that you would want from a World Time watch. First, case size is relatively wearable at 41.8 millimeters, but with the more compact lug-to-lug of the case, wears like a 39 to 40 millimeter on wrist. You're getting 100 meters of water resistance, solid Casio module, a lot of the functions that come with conventional Casio watches in this price range. But in addition to all of these key features that come with these Casios, typically you also get that different function of seeing those different time zones around the world. So next we're going to jump up quite considerably here. This is just kind of the nature of World Time complications. There is not going to be as many mechanical options at the more attainable tier. So it's very relative to what this complication is bringing forward and how it's a bit more complex. So how brands are able to move around this to get more of some World Time functionality without going the extra mile and spending a ton of extra money with R&D to get their own World Time function movements is offering GMT calibers that also can be utilized to showcase some different World Time functionality. The first case here we have with Junghans with their Meister World Timer. This is a watch that I think looks great. It infuses much of the DNA of conventional Junghans. Many people, when they think of this brand, of course, are going to associate the Max Bill design. I would say the second pillar for them is going to be the Meister, and then also the Form collection, which also brings some great pieces to the table. The Meister, though, is usually a framework that they utilize for a variety of different complications, and I think the World Time is probably one of the best examples of exactly this. 40 millimeter case, 10.5 millimeter thickness. These do come with sapphire crystals now. Junghans, if you're not familiar now, are shifting away from their plexiglass use of crystals. They've heard people loud and clear, they want sapphire, and they've done a really good job adapting this to still allow that kind of vintage hue and effect with that kind of curvaceous nature of the entire case, and also what people like to see from that dome crystal. 45 millimeter lug to lug, so wears, I would say, slightly smaller than what the 40 millimeters is going to propose. Just keep in mind that there's not much of a bezel, if anything, on this watch. And as mentioned, a SW330 movement on the inside. This is a conventional GMT Bosch caliber, but they're able to utilize it to have some World Time functionality. And next up, we have the Rado Overpull. Follows a very similar format to that Junghans Meister. Now, the model that this one pulls a lot of its inspiration from is the Captain Cook DNA, a line that dates back to 1962. This is utilizing a 37 millimeter, that first kind of original case style that we saw with the Captain Cook, and utilizing some World Time functionality in the process. So you're getting with that a 10.5 millimeter thickness, really restrained lug to lug. I would say this wears like a 36 on wrist. These are going to wear smaller than even proposed. I think it looks pretty cool in practice though with this watch, because it's not necessarily leaning into the dive watch aesthetic, but with these different components of the external bezel, then with the different display of time zones around the world, you are getting some more broken down elements of this, which make it wear even smaller than you might even see with the 37 millimeter Captain Cook. This is a manual ETA 2804 base here with a box sapphire crystal on the front. When looking at GMT watches from a vintage watchmaking perspective that I think just look fantastic, the Zodiac Aerospace GMTs are at the top of the list. Now, Zodiac has shifted in the language around their aerospace line and now really falling everything underneath the Seawolf umbrella. And here we have an evolution on this concept with world time functionality with the Zodiac Super Seawolf World Timer. So this utilizes a familiar case if you've ever worn any of their other GMT watches, 40 millimeters in nature, 13.5 millimeters in thickness, and a 47.8 millimeter lug to lug. It does still come with 200 meters of water resistance and a movement that has been getting a lot more play as of late with the Soprod C125. And another thing that you're gonna notice with some of the watches in this price range, but this one specifically, is going to be the use of the bezel as the place to rest those different time zones. And with that insert, I think does have a pretty cool nature in how they're being displayed. Maybe some legibility concerns with those that don't have the freshest of eyes anymore, but a pretty cool watch in practice, and I'm a big fan of this entire extension of GMT style watches from this brand. Now, this is where we start to see a significant step up in what you're getting from the caliber on the inside. And I think the best representation of this significant jump up starts here with FC, with Frederic Constant and their classic World Timer. So this is a special watch for a couple of reasons. One is going to be that this is a manufacturer caliber, and the price and where it lands for a World Time watch is very, very good. This really does set the standard for where you can get a manufacturer World Timer watch in the entire market. Under $5,000 to get this, very well positioned. But in addition to that, what makes this watch very interesting is how you can actually utilize the World Time functionality, set it with just using one crown. As you're gonna see throughout the rest of this list, World Timers are not necessarily the easiest things to set. So to use one single crown rather than additional pushers on the side of the case is more of an anomaly. So they've been able to pull this off with just one crown at a more attainable price range than much of the competition. The watch is a little larger despite its more refined looks, 42 millimeters, thickness of 12.1 millimeters, which very nice to see. It does wear slightly smaller. I would say wears closer to a 40.5 to 41 on wrist, 50 meters of water resistance, and as mentioned, FC 718 movement on the flip side, which does have some nice decoration, all machine finish of course, but still looks very solid compared to many of the Bosch movements that you're going to find throughout this price range. And just as another note, I don't think people give enough credit to FC and what they're doing from a watch manufacturing perspective. Manufacturer movements, I mean, they are a vertically integrated manufacturer. You're talking about in-house calibers that I think now is getting closer to 25, 30 total in their collection. So very much leading the way in this price segment when it comes to their own manufactured calibers, which I don't think it's talked about quite often. So next we have one of my personal favorites on the list. I would say it's another one of those anomalies of using creativity with one of the movements they already have produced to manufacture caliber on the inside and upholding German watchmaking in the price segment and doing it exceptionally well. That is with Nomos with their Zurich World Time. So how this watch essentially works is it has the rotating ring of different time zones. You also have an additional scale for your home time that you'll find close to the crown position at 3 o'clock. And then you'll have the adjustment of that local hour hand at the center, which requires the activation of a pusher. But what they were able to pull off here is taking their DUW 5201 movement, which is a GMT movement that they utilize in other watches, and offer up some World Time functionality in the process. This is available in a couple different dial variations. You have the blue, you have the silver. I really do like the blue kind of midnight hue. I think it works well with a contrast perspective and just has more of a vivid type of nature that allows all the layered elements and three-dimensionality of the dial itself to all kind of fuse together as one without sacrificing that legibility in the process. 39.9 millimeters, but it is going to wear larger than that. I'd say it wears like a 40.5 to a 41 on wrist. 30 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal, and probably one of the leading manufacturer calibers in the price segment when you're talking about from a finishing perspective. Nomos is one of the great success stories in the last 30 years of watchmaking. You probably only would need two hands to be able to count all the brands that have really succeeded in the last 30 years and went from kind of more of a boutique concept brand to really being a major player in the independent sphere and being a major producer of German watches in a region that has now really recovered and become a fixture in the world of global watchmaking. Next, we have one of my personal favorites on the list and one of the best World Timers you can find for under $10,000. Just visually, it looks fantastic, and that is the Omega Aquaterra world timer. So one downside of this watch is going to be its larger case at 43 millimeters. It wears like a 41.5 to 42 on wrist, but not going to be the smallest of watches. But if you can look past that, your wrist can accommodate it. I think this is one of the best watches that Omega makes under $10,000 if you can pull it off. You do get many of the perks of the Aquaterra family in the process: 150 meters of water resistance, spectacular movement on the inside. But for me, the winner here is just the looks of this watch. Sometimes when you are fusing complications with the framework of a design family, it doesn't work. But with the Aquaterra and the World Time complication, it really does. And the thing that makes it work is the laser ablated titanium plate at the center that resembles the globe, which just looks beautiful. If you just look up close with the macro lens, you can see that fine texture that you probably can't appreciate fully with the naked eye. On the inside, you have the Omega 8938 coaxial caliber, isolated local hour function. So this is getting very creative in how they're able to utilize that world time functionality while looking great in the process. Next, we have IWC and Pilot watches, GMTs, world times. This is just going together like peanut butter and jelly. And here, I think you see those two concepts come together. So this watch has a little bit of a higher price tier compared to some of the competition we've seen so far, but you're getting a lot of things you might like. Now, for one, it is going to be a larger watch. So if you want to get into the big Pilot style of family, this might be of interest to you, but definitely not thin either. So you're talking about 16.8 millimeters in thickness, water resistance at 60 meters, and the 89-760 caliber on the inside. So this was released in 2016, features a in-house caliber, 68-hour power reserve, which is nice to see, flyback chronograph function with a 24-hour additional time zone functionality, with those different time zones being featured very easily and legibly. Now let's jump up to our next tier here, and we have A. Lange & Söhne with the Lange 1 time zone. Now Lange are masters of taking a conventional framework, kind of what I was talking about earlier, and building complications on top of them. The Lange 1 is such a refined complication, so how could you go about taking the busyness that is going to be a world time and fusing it within this language of the Lange 1 while respecting the spacing that needs to take place? I think this is a masterclass in exactly doing that. Now, it does extend out the size of this watch to get it closer to a Grand Lange here. You're talking about a 41.9 millimeter case diameter, thickness of 10.9 millimeters, so all considered still relatively thin and very slender for a world time watch. But I think the amazing thing here, there's two things. One is just how this watch from its visual display is able to infuse world time functionality within the Lange 1 DNA, and then also the manual caliber on the inside, the L141.1. So you're getting the engraved balance cock 3/4 plate, but in addition to that, you have that time zone mechanism on the back with its own engraved bridge that you'll see in unison. And all the details of fine German watchmaking are here on display. So this next watch here is one that is a little bit unconventional for this list, and some could maybe potentially argue it's a little bit more of its own thing than a true world time watch. It does have a disc along the outside that is hidden mostly, apart from the open aperture where you can see the single time zone in which you're looking at. But this watch has something very unconventional, and that it has a memory snapback feature where you can save 2 time zones. Also will have a day-night indicator and a date, and all of those things will adjust accordingly. So if you're dealing at 2 different time zones, you press the pusher on the left side of the case, it'll snap to another time zone, and whether it's day or night in that area, or if you're jumping back or forward in time with the date, it will also know how to do that. So this is the Breguet Marine Aura-mundi. This is the 5557 reference. This is not a complication that is new to Breguet. Within the Marine collection, obviously getting a little bit more of a sporty function. This has its own time zone module that will allow it to do this. Crazy complicated as you would imagine. You have a disc that's going to be isolated for the date. You have a disc that's going to be isolated for the additional time zones. And then you'll have a 2-armed display for that AM/PM indicator. And all of these are working in tandem to create a very unique display of different time zones around the globe. And then for the last watch on our list, I think this just feels like the appropriate watch to end on. That is the Patek Philippe 5231J. Now, if you look at the history of GMT watches, world timers, much of it usually originates back to the 1950s. That's usually where we start this whole progression of thinking about GMT-oriented watches. But really, if you wanted to get true to it, you'd actually go back to the late 1930s with Patek Philippe and their world timers, and utilizing with Louis Cotier that functionality of a world time watch. Now, this really descends from that lineage directly with the 5231. This is going to utilize a classic classic display with a enamel central dial that's just emblematic of this world time design from Patek Philippe. This watch comes in with a 38.5 millimeter case, thickness of 10.2 millimeters. Movement is the Patek Philippe 240HU, has a rotating day-night indicating disc on a 24-hour scale, and then also the additional time zones with the activation of the pusher, does all the work for you and being able to adjust different time zones around the globe. This is a complication that Patek Philippe has mastered and really can own as pioneers of it for decades and decades. But all right, guys, that's my list looking at some great world timers at a variety of different price points. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon, really would appreciate that. Also, if you want more things world time watches, we'll have a link in the description down below to an article with 17 world time watches you should also be aware of. Some overlap, but mostly all new pieces that you can also get lost in. And finally, check out TeddyBaldenstar.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. How we're able to create all the content on this channel is through selling watches on our site. So if you are in the market for a watch, we'd love to have your business. We know you can buy a watch from essentially anywhere, but that would really mean a lot to us and allow us to continue to create content like this for the future and helping just get more people into watches. That's really the goal of all of this. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.